Oops, let me get that one changed. See, I got that changed. Chris, Terry, me. There we go. Now we're talking. Look, we got Final Cut Pro Radio TV Live today. We have the fine folks from LumaTouch, the ones that bring you LumaFusion on the iPad. All the way to the left, Chris Damaris. In the center, Terry Morgan. And of course, my name's Richard Taylor. And what I wanted to, I've had them on so many times, and I've just one of the, always my favorite guests. But I wanted to talk about WWDC specifically. So first, I presume you watched it?
Oh yeah, we watched the keynotes, and members of the team are all watching different sessions to see what's coming up in the technical details. So yeah, we're heavily involved in that.
So just generically, what did you think of this year's keynote versus the live keynotes they've done in the past?
Well, it certainly has a different dynamic when you don't have the audience cheering,
Right.
But I think they did a great job. I think, and honestly, the sessions are actually even better. They're a little shorter, they're a little more concise, and getting to the, the meat of what we want. So I'm actually really enjoying this year's WWDC.
Yeah, I did too. I thought this was actually better than the live ones. And I guess that's because they were produced, and they could take care of any mistakes that they had, and they could shoot the best angles and the best lighting and everything else. But I was pleasantly surprised. It was actually one of the best ones. Maybe it was a combination of the content plus the production value. Now, I kind of missed the live part too.
That's what editing can do for you, I guess.
Well, exactly. That's what I do, post-production. I mean, people talk about, when I do Final Cut Pro Radio, I edit the audio. And it's, I don't edit, every little thing out of it, but I'd like to get it down so it's concise for the listener, what I would like to hear myself, rather than, and plus there's sometimes I record them in advance and something like pre-NAB, and the NAB passes by, so there's no sense in talking about a pre-NAB section. Pull that out if I'm doing that kind of a thing. What did you think about it, Terry?
I felt the same. I didn't get a chance to watch very much of it myself. I still will watch some sessions, but I do prefer more concise, less, I don't have a lot of time to spend watching it. So I want it to be pretty concise. Yeah. Right,
exactly. So one of the things I wanted to talk to, hopefully Chris can help out, since you're the developer, the actual software guy for LumaFusion.
I'm the head developer on the team. Yeah, I originally wrote it, and now we have a pretty good sized team that's all working on new features on it. But yeah, I head the team.
Okay. So there's a couple of things they talked about during the keynote. First off was Universal 2.
Right.
So let's go over, just if you can do that, just by describing it.
Yeah. So the first Universal came when they did the switch from the PowerPC to the Intel-based, processors. And what that allows for is for developers to build a Mac app that runs on both platforms from one app. And so now Universal 2 is exactly the same thing, but including both Intel and the new Apple Silicon or ARM-based processors, so that a developer can basically have one app that they put on the App Store or distribute to customers that will run on either platform. The existing Macs and any upcoming Intel Macs, and the new Apple Silicon-based Macs that'll be coming out next year. So that's what a universal app is. For the most part, for most developers, it'll just mean having two compilations of the same code. And in some cases, they may have to make changes for the new processor, but hopefully not too many. That's, from at least what was said during the sessions, it should be a relatively small amount of work.
So is there a difference in performance between the two?
Well, because one is compiled for one platform, for one processor, and one is compiled for the other, there will be differences in performance. But which one will be faster is still a question. Obviously, Apple has spent a lot of time optimizing these new, CPUs, and they run beautifully on the iPads, as we've found, as far as processing video and everything else. So the likely occurrence is that these new ARM-based, apps are going to run very fast. Now for each individual app, I don't know. There might be some apps where it still runs faster on Intel initially, and some apps where it immediately runs faster on the ARM processor, depending on what Apple comes out with, as far as their first ARM-based Macs.
Well, we expect the first ones. I mean, I'm expecting the first ARM-based Macs to be lower end, either the Mac Mini or a MacBook or a MacBook Air. That's what I'm expecting. And they said that'll be, when Apple says it'll be this year or in 2020, it'll be like December 19th.
Right.
Right. We won't see it before that. And then they said it'll take 2 years for the complete, about 2 years. Yeah. They didn't say it's going to be exactly 2 years. I think this Mac Pro that I have here is going to be tough to beat with the new ARM-based processors. Yeah. This thing is just an incredible workhorse. So we have a couple of comments. We have hi from India. And then we have Brad Olson from Off the Tracks said, loved seeing LumaFusion featured on iPad OS in the WW keynote, and he gives the time code at 33 minutes and 12 seconds.
Yeah. Right when Craig Federini was, talking about, iPad OS and talks about, the great apps that have come out that have taken it a step further into the pro level. LumaFusion was front and center there, along with Procreate and some of the other ones that, are really the top apps for, productivity and creative people on iOS. So that was fun to see.
So Universal 2, basically, for somebody like myself who's not a developer, is a dual system where you can run an app on both the Intel and the Apple Silicon.
Right.
But it's a single app, right?
It's a single app. Yeah, it's a single app. Inside of this universal package, there really are almost two apps. There's, there's the compiled code for the new processors and the compiled code for the old processors. But things like the media and images are all shared between the two. So, but really, it's a package that contains both of them and runs the correct one based on which processor you're on.
Well, that makes perfect sense now. Now I understand it. The way you just explained it, it's actually like two apps that have some shared content. And whatever processor you load up with, that's the version that'll be running. But I imagine initially there might be some Intel versions that are better than the Apple Silicon versions. I mean, initially.
Certainly there's a possibility of that. It's really hard to know. It depends how long. Honestly, it depends how long Apple's been working on the compilers and the optimization. But they do have a lot of, because they've been doing this for iOS, where they've been getting incredible performance out of a mobile platform. I wouldn't be surprised, if it ends up going the other way around, again, depending on what they come out with and, and everything else. From what we saw in the keynote showing, Final Cut Pro running on, Apple Silicon, there's a good chance that by fall or by the first machines that come out that they'll have optimized it quite well, and that's certainly where they'll be putting their focus on optimization. So so we'll see.
Right. So Terry, are you like me and all this stuff just?
Yeah, I mean, I have the benefit of listening to Chris a lot. I have to say 90% of it goes right over my head. I'm more interested in I'm interested in what that means for the customer, like what that means for the editor or the creator. Are we going to see Final Cut? Where's Final Cut going to be? I want to know that. People are asking us if Final Cut will come to iPad.
Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to get into that very specifically. I wanted to do some of this more generic stuff first. Okay.
Yeah.
So I really liked Big Sur. I mean, I'm more excited about Big Sur than I was about Catalina last year. Last year was like, whoa, I'm not so sure I want to update, and I didn't update for a long time. Big Sur, I might even try the beta on a separate partition.
Yeah, it's really pretty, really clean look. I think they've done a nice way of bringing a little bit of what iPad OS has in cleanness, but still keeping it a desktop, capable operating system. So it feels really nice just from what I've seen so far.
Now tell me, so I understand what you said about the universal, but the apps. What about the OS? Is the OS also in a sense, universal? I mean, Big Sur?
Well, my guess is, in a sense, they're going to package two separate versions, but they'll be the same compiled code. I mean, they'll be the same source code that's compiled for the two, different platforms. And there'll be differences in certain portions of that
Sure.
source code, but most of it will be the same. I mean, they've been, the base foundation of the operating system, is running iOS and macOS anyway. They're really, the same foundation. And so they've already done this most of this work. It's where they've probably had to spend the most time is bringing across all of the controls and UI stuff that, and, the command line utilities and things like that, just have to be recompiled or reworked, for the new platform. So there's a lot of work they've had to do. And I think there'll be two separate binaries, one for, the ARM-based Macs and one for Intel-based Macs, but they're based on the same code.
I see. So, and then Tim Cook said they will be making iOS for Intel for years to come.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, macOS for Intel, yeah.
macOS for Intel for years to come, besides the new version everybody's talking. Everybody's up in an uproar about certain aspects, and it's like, I don't think that's true, what you're saying, so that's why I wanted to talk about some of these things. So
yeah, they supported PowerPC for a lot, for years and years, before they finally stopped producing versions for that. Yeah. I
remember them, Steve Jobs coming on there and talking about how great PowerPC was versus Intel. And then he did 180 degrees, and said, no, we're going to Intel. And then he also told us at that keynote that we've been running Mac OS 10 on an Intel machine since day one.
Right.
People didn't know that at the time. They said, so this is not something new. We're doing a little secret back here. So what now let's talk about Rosetta 2.
Okay. Rosetta's a little different. It allows you to run Intel apps, Intel compiled apps without, that are not universal on the new ARM-based processors. So it will actually translate the machine instructions that were for Intel for the new Apple Silicon and allow it to run. Now, that will have a slight performance hit, but what they showed, during the demonstration showed that it's doing quite well. And so that'll be sort of the first step for those people who can't, immediately do a universal app. Their app should still run. A good number of them will run on, on the new Macs without any change. So that gives us, gives a runway for the people who need longer to get their apps, converted to Universal 2.
Right. And then I don't think anybody expects the pro level Macs to be out this year. I mean, that's,
that'd be surprising.
Yeah. This is going to be a MacBook Air, and then maybe the Mac Mini, since they already showed the Mac. They already showed the Mac Mini for the developers. Did you guys get one of those?
One of our engineers who has done a lot of Mac work is getting one. So yeah, he'll be working on that, and so we'll at least get to see it a little bit. Yeah.
So one of the takeaways, I got a lot of takeaways from John Gruber's interview with Craig Federini today. One of the takeaways is the Macs that are shipping later this year with Apple Silicon, it will not be the current iPad chip.
Right.
It'll be something more advanced.
I have no doubt that they've been working on specific chips for the desktop platforms that are going to have, more power. When they're making an iPad chip, the entire focus is on energy efficiency, battery life, those things, as well as performance. Where with the desktop ones, they'll be able to balance that differently, more towards performance. And I think, we'll see that in the chips they do for the desktop.
So one more technical thing, Terry, then we'll go on to the good stuff.
Oh, no, it's all right. I'm enjoying this.
So now what is Catalyst?
All right. So Catalyst is something they've actually had out for, I can't remember if it's 1 or 2 years. And that is a technology that allows developers like us who have created iPad or primarily iPad apps to bring those to macOS on either Intel or the new Silicon. A lot of the apps you now see on Mac, things like the music app and messages, and messages now in the new version, but a few of the apps are these apps that are basically iPad apps that have been converted through Catalyst to run on Mac. And the difference here from just a straight port is that it will run the iPad app, but also gives you the access to more of the Mac OS's capabilities for adding menus and things that you'd expect in a Mac app. And so you can create an app that's basically both for iPad and for Mac with just the differences you need to have it, the things you need to run on the Mac. And the adoption hasn't been really big on that from what I've seen. We looked at it a little bit last year and just felt that it wasn't quite ready for us. But with the changes they've brought in this year, we're going to have to take another look and see if it might be something we, look at. Now, there's a funny side to that is that the new Macs will run, all iPad apps just right out of the gate, and so people will be able to run the LumaFusion on the new Macs without any work whatsoever on our part. However, that'll be an iPad experience on a Mac, and I still think that's a different thing than using Catalyst to bring the app over and add the features that are needed for the Mac. So
let's talk about that specifically. One of the things, once again, in this John Gruber interview with Craig Federini, is the developer of the iOS app has a choice.
Yes.
He has a choice whether that'll play on the Mac or not. There's a check. He said there's a single checkbox when you do terms of service or whatever.
Right. For us, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't allow it. More users who can use it on whatever platform they want to use it on. That's an easy choice for us. But I can see why some might want to keep it purely on, on the iPad, for a particular experience. And I can understand that.
Or for marketing reasons, if you're selling already a Mac app that is different, you don't want that. I think it's a slippery slope, though, because I've been involved with designing stuff for editing on desktop for years, and I can say the most, I don't want to say evil, but it's kind of like a usability evil is menus, context menus. That is the one place where we completely lose sight of the user's ability to just look at your app or application and see what to do. And I think that's where the devil comes into editing is a lot of deep menus and trying to, just the fear of not knowing what's in there. And like, if I go in there, where am I going to find something? What's it going to be? What's it going to do? Should I click on it? This is really a usability evil for us, because everything you can do on LumaFusion is self-evident. It's just right on the screen, and you know what to do. And that's partly why editing on LumaFusion is so much more joyful and fun than editing on a desktop. You might be able to do like a million different codecs and different settings on Final Cut, but having something just very transparent to use reduces the stress when you're editing, allows you to focus on your creativity and on your story and the more, fundamental things of storytelling. And I think that's why when we started doing LumaFusion, I was just blown over by the fact that I loved editing again. It was like I loved it in 1988, and now I love it again. And as I've thought about it, I think it's just because it's been pared down to this really efficient, usable machine. I love it. And we're always saying, yes, we could do this and we could do that. We could go to Mac. We could use Catalyst and go to Mac, or we could have menus in LumaFusion because now we can have context menus. And I was like, yes, but should we? That's the question I'm always asking.
Right.
And I'll continue to ask it because I don't want to ruin an experience that is really great.
Well, that's a very interesting concept. So when I talked to you 2 NABs ago, if you remember back that far, you were considering doing a Mac app in those days. Mm-hmm. So the question I have, if people are going to be using LumaFusion on the Mac, will you revisit that to make it maybe a little, tweak it to make it a better experience than just the iPad version? Can't you do fewer menu items or whatever?
Right. I mean, it's everything. It's the whole touch versus mouse and the menus as well, and just the expectations that you have from using a desktop app. So I think, having said that, after we considered that a couple years ago, I'm the one that said, you know what? let's make the best iPad editor we can and not try to do something else kind of halfway. But you do have to change with the world. The world changes, technology changes, and we can't, I don't want to be a company that's saying we can't change, we can't,
Sure.
The fact is you have to stay relevant, and I do want to stay relevant. And I do want people to enjoy LumaFusion in more places, but it's not like a snap your fingers and it's done. From my book, it might be technology-wise that way in some cases, but
Sure.
from my book, it's not. It needs a whole new rethinking of how we do things. Just like every time we come out with a feature, we come up with a way we think we're going to do it, and then we examine that over a period of months or even sometimes a year to say, wow, our assumptions weren't quite right, and we need to adjust things to make it really fun or usable. So same thing goes here, but on a huge scale. You got to do that for everything we do.
Right.
So, yeah. I'm the stickler for usability here. So
Right. Well, I guess the point is, since people will be using it on the Mac, do you want them to use the iPad version, or do you want to tweak it to whatever you have to do to make an actual Mac version?
Yeah,
I guess that's the. I mean, obviously, you could be thinking about that and talk about it at a future date. But that's something that I was thinking about, because I was excited when you told me you were going to make a Mac version. To be honest with you, back a couple years ago, I was excited because I like a lot of things in LumaFusion more than I do in Final Cut. So
yeah, I was excited too. But as we thought about it, I think
sure, yes.
But I do think it's a time for us to rethink that and put some of our resources into figuring out that question, what is the right thing to do, and make sure that as we move, we're frankly pretty much going to be not forced, but
well,
the
you kind of,
doing
yeah.
it, right? So,
yeah.
so we're going to do it. We're going to do it right. It might take us longer than people would hope, because we're not going to snap our fingers and just say, yeah, but
sure. Well, you're not known for that. You're known for quality. I mean, people like that about LumaTouch / LumaFusion.
Yes. Yeah, and I want to keep that. You could very quickly ruin your brand and your product by putting it in a place where it doesn't quite belong yet. So if we do it, we'll do it right. And at least that's my 2 cents.
Absolutely. So, Chris, another technical question. I forgot one more. So, Swift, is there a version for the Mac and a version for iOS? Are there two separate versions or just one?
No, Swift is a computer language, and so it's the same on both.
Okay.
Now, there are frameworks, pieces of the operating system to do parts of the UI and things like that, and the file system access. Some of those are different between Mac and iOS, so you might have to write slightly different code on one or the other. But that's one area where Apple is really working to try to unify that with some of the new libraries and technologies like Swift UI to build UIs that are compatible on both operating systems. They're really working hard to make that simpler and simpler as they move forward.
So somebody asked, I just saw this today on Facebook, and of course I didn't know the answer to this. Somebody said, okay, so iOS apps will be able to be opened on a Mac, but macOS apps cannot be opened on iOS. And it was Roger Bolton. He said iOS and macOS are different operating systems with different libraries available. Using Catalyst, it's easy to make an iOS app run on macOS. Going the other way is not so easy because there are many libraries in macOS that don't exist in iOS. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. macOS is obviously a much older operating system that has, a long history and has a lot of things in it for professional users, not only for our video users, but for programmers, for systems users. There's just hundreds and hundreds of utilities and libraries and things that there's no way. The whole reason for coming out with iOS was to get rid of that stuff for a mobile platform. And they're not going to want to bring it back. It's much easier to go the other way. And I don't think there'll be they're doing a lot of things to make portions of the UI similar between the two, where you can have, trees and things like that, and the context menus and so forth. But I don't, you'll never see the two truly combined, where you can run macOS on an iPad. It doesn't really make sense either,
right.
From the fact that you want to focus on efficiency and battery life, and a good performance on a mobile platform is different. Yeah.
So we just got the nicest compliment for you guys. There's a special place in heaven for developers like these. That's Ben Bowser said that.
That's so
Well, thank
sweet.
you. I'm glad it wasn't the opposite.
No, I wouldn't have mentioned it if it was the opposite. So let me see what else we have. There's a lot of things I want to talk to you about. So let me see. So let's talk about the limitation now with accessing SSDs with LumaFusion via the USB-C port in the iPad Pro. Now, from what I understand, I was on Twitter and I was talking to different people, and from what I understand, the problem is that you can't access the files directly. They have to go through the Files app, and that slows things down. It's a bottleneck of sorts.
It's not quite like that. We can directly, you'll find that you can connect to a folder in LumaFusion that's on an external drive and directly, read from that and directly write to it. So it is possible for apps to build that, but they have to build that. They have to actually make some code changes. We did that last year's WWDC. And so, each app has to do that individually to directly access those files and do some work there. Now, you can also do it through some system capabilities where you can pop up a document picker that you can then drag things directly from there, though that's sort of part of the file system. Really, as far as speed goes, I think the bottleneck is simply, it's an early adoption of it. We're finding that the performance isn't fast enough where we can edit directly off that, for example. That's probably the key, thing that we've had asked for from users. And we're continuing to monitor that with each, operating system upgrade, because my guess is that Apple will continue to improve that performance so that we can do it. Now, as an aside on this, I'd love to mention this just so in case our users haven't heard it. We did post this, is we have found a little bug right now that we're currently working, we're in contact with Apple about. If you hook up an exFAT formatted drive of a certain size, and we're currently working on figuring out what that is, and write out files to it, they can in some cases become corrupted. And so I would just warn your users to be a little cautious about that. If they're not on other platforms like Windows, I would recommend they format their external drives APFS, using the disk utility on Mac.
Sure.
That avoids the problem entirely. But like I said, we are working on trying to figure out where the exact details of this problem, and working with Apple to hopefully get that fixed soon, because our users use external drives quite a bit for archiving their projects, for storing their media, those kind of things.
I'm surprised the iPad can access an exFAT drive, to be honest with you.
Yeah. They support FAT, exFAT, APFS, and the standard, journal files, HFS. So yeah, they put in a lot of work to make that happen, but it seems like a bug cropped up as far as the exFAT support goes.
Okay, so that there's not a real issue other than it's just not fast enough so far.
Right. Yeah. So it's certainly possible technically. I did a test of it internally, and we can directly access those files.
Okay.
We can, put them in a composition and have them editable. It was purely a performance reason. And so once the performance gets good enough where a few streams could be done, we may enable it as an option in the app, but we've got to look at that again. We won't make that happen until we feel it's a usable, feature.
What we do currently, Richard, is move we copy the file to the local directory.
Exactly.
We do that automatically. Yeah. We do it automatically, but it does mean it's using storage on your internal device.
Right.
Right, which that's not a problem. It's not a problem at all. When I use it, the good thing is you can set an in and out point and not bring the whole clip over.
Right. Yeah.
That's a real nice benefit, I think. So let's talk about Final Cut Pro running on that darn iPad Pro chip.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Well, let me just say one thing first.
Yeah.
You cannot. There's something different about the way macOS runs that chip versus iOS. Correct? It's got to be, right?
Yeah, well, it is the same chip. I mean, it's, if you get one of those Mac Minis with an A12Z in it, it's really the same as an iPad from a CPU level standpoint. However, Final Cut is like macOS it's a very complex product with a lot of libraries, a lot of code that's, in there to support all the different codecs, to support all the different things that are out there. Of course, from a UI standpoint, it's, purely desktop based, so bringing it over to the iPad, that's probably would be the lower level stuff, might be the easy stuff to bring over, except for memory management, disk management, all those things we've had to spend so much time on the iPad to make sure that we're not using too much memory, that we're not, and those are, I think Apple does a good job with that, but they don't have to worry about that as much on the Mac. And so there'd be work there. But it's that UI work to completely change the paradigm to a touch interface and a smaller UI that I think is a massive undertaking. So I don't think we'll see FCP on iOS anytime soon. It wouldn't surprise me if Apple's working on it. That's no reason why they would or wouldn't be, in particular, depending on what their business goals are in that. But I still think it would take quite a bit of time. And I think right now their focus is very likely just getting it running perfectly on the Mac, on the new Macs. And that's, I'm guessing, a very big, task as well that's going to take their whole team. So.
And the other issue with porting Mac Final Cut Pro to the iPad is I have 1,000 plugins.
There you go.
Third-party plugins. How in the world are they going to manage that?
And that's, they would have to change their model to allow a new type of plugin for that. Now as an interesting note to that, we're working with some, companies to bring plugins into LumaFusion, but those will have to actually be built into LumaFusion, where we have to get them from the manufacturer, build it in. But we're working on some of those things to add new functionality to LumaFusion. And so, that's a massive undertaking to get plugins, the plugins people use for Final Cut onto the iPad.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Are they going to have to rewrite them for the iPad if they, and not charge for them, or?
It's a good question. I don't know. For the ones we're working with, they certainly have to recompile to iOS, and they have to do some work to make that work properly. Again, there's enough similarities under the hood where that's not a big piece of work. But for things like the UI portions of it and things like that, that's a lot of work. And iOS, of course, has much stricter controls over what an app can access. And I think that would break a number of plugins as well.
So that's what everybody's been talking about. Not everybody, but people have been talking about Final Cut Pro coming to the iPad. And it's like, I think eventually it would get there, but I certainly don't think we're going to see it anytime, in the next year or so.
Well, I mean, it's not only a technical problem, but as Chris mentioned, it's a UI problem and a usability problem. But it's also, from a marketing perspective, you have to ask, is that, if you're trying to sell hardware, are you trying to sell more iPads by moving Final Cut to iPad, or are you trying to sell more new Macs? So it's just, there's all sorts of variations on why they may not do that, and even if they do, I think LumaFusion is going to be different than Final Cut, and I think we'll still be just fine, actually. So
yeah, one of the things we have worked so hard on are all of our integrations with different companies. Dropbox and everything else that you can work with, very easily and integrated in the app, and drives like the Narbox and the Western Digital Wireless and all those. And I'd be very surprised to see Apple working on those same integrations, putting time into that. So I think we'll always have advantages, and we're always moving forward with new features and capabilities that I think will make us at least different, where even if FCP comes out, will still be a very good choice of part of somebody's video editing toolkit, and maybe their preferred editor, depending on, what they like and don't like about Final Cut.
Absolutely. I mean, I say that anytime anybody talks about Final Cut on the iPad, I said, you have a superior product right now called LumaFusion. It has features that Final Cut doesn't have. I say this all the time, that I like, the ability to lock tracks, for one. The ability to color code clips and sort by color. The fact that you have a mini timeline underneath of the viewer that Final Cut doesn't have. I mean, there's things I don't want, I don't want those things to disappear. I absolutely like the fact that you guys have done better than some things in Final Cut.
Well,
So-
I mean, I think we've been really good about finding the two editing models that we like the most was the track-based editing and then the magnetic track editing or magnetic timeline and kind of combining them. And we want the best of these things into a new editing model that is, I think, better than anything else I've used over 30 years. So.
Now, have you tried the new Magic Keyboard with the trackpad with the iPad Pro and LumaFusion? How is that working?
It works very well, and our next update will have some improvements to that as well, as far as how the little highlights work when you're moving around. It works really well. However, I don't find any personal advantage to it other than if I were doing more keyboard, if I were doing more editing, having the keyboard handy to me might be good, but I do less editing than most people, because I have to work on the code.
Sure.
I still like just touching the interface, but it does work nicely. It's really well designed, and we're working on also updating keyboard commands, across multiple countries to make it really work well.
Yeah, and we made this. I'm going to show you here because I've just got it open here. We've made this keyboard overlay that goes on your
oh, wow.
smart keyboard.
Very
it has
cool.
all the keyboard commands color coded, so you know when to hit Control or Command or
Right.
Option or whatever. And so that is now available for the iPad Pro 11 and 12.5, and it's in the works for the Magic Keyboard. So
yeah, it's available for the smart keyboard, and we're working on it for Editor Keys is working on it for the Magic Keyboard as well.
Yeah, we've done that with Editor's Keys. So
Yeah, so that Magic Keyboard is $350.
uh-huh.
It better have some magic in it for that kind of a price point, because that really, jacks up the price of the iPad Pro. However, if I get an iPad Pro, I absolutely would get one of those.
Now, I'll tell you something about that. If you get one of those, you'll still want one of just the regular covers. I got one of those, and that thing is so heavy that I just leave it on my desktop, and when I want to
Really?
use my iPad, I pull it off and put on a regular cover. It adds, they actually have metal in there for the balancing on it, and it's
I see.
super heavy. Yeah,
Wow.
so that's a disadvantage.
Huh.
That's
Also,
interesting.
the Magic Keyboard has actual keys, right? So if you spill something, you can ruin that. So if you do,
That's true.
when we get one of these out for that, you're going to need
It'll
it.
protect it.
Right, exactly. Well, that's true. That's a good point, because that's one of the best ways you can ruin a keyboard is spilling coffee or Coke or something on it.
Yeah.
Especially
But
if
I
the
will say
cat.
the Magic Keyboard does feel really good. It's a good keyboard. That's the one nice thing about it. So, and the trackpad works fine.
So Ben Bowser says for $350, I wanted to mix my drinks for me. $350 for the Magic
There you go.
Keyboard. There you go.
That's right.
So one of the things about the Apple Silicon is it going to be less expensive than Intel comparable machines? I mean,
yeah. Knowing Apple, probably not, just because they do premium products, and unless the performance isn't as good, maybe they'll make it lower. But my guess is they're working on the performance, and they're going to make this premium just like they did before. Now, it'll be cheaper for Apple because they'll be producing their own, they'll be having their chips fabricated. I don't know if it'll be cheaper for us or not.
Yeah, well, at least it shouldn't get any more expensive, because they're, like you said, they're not. Yeah. I'm sure they get a special deal from Intel for all the chips that they buy and stuff. Yeah. But I'm not. I have a Mac Pro 2019 Facebook group, and people are on there talking about, should I get a Mac Pro? Should I turn mine back in? Blah, blah. Listen, they're not going to have a Mac Pro version of this for 2 or 3 years from now. So if you can live without a Mac Pro, I can't anymore. This is absolutely the best Mac I've ever owned in my life. There's no way that I would not get one now and then worry about the Mac Pro version 2 or 3 years from now. But once again, do you want to get the first Mac Pro that's coming out with those chips? Maybe
Right.
not. Maybe you want to wait for the second rev. And in the meantime, Tim Cook said that they're still going to make OSs specifically for Intel for years to come. Now, years means at least 2, but it's probably more like the PowerPC transition. It's probably going to be 3 to 5 years. And by then, I would have replaced the Mac Pro anyway. 5 years probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only difference, I don't think you'll know a difference between an Intel and an Apple Silicon Mac, other than the fact that the Apple Silicon Macs can run the iPad apps. That's the one difference that it'll have. But other than that, I don't think you'd be able to tell the difference between the two. If you had a blind test of, running them both, I think they're going to run the same.
Well, I'm sure people are going to be testing,
Oh, yeah.
getting microscopic speed improvements. Oh, look, this one does this one a little bit fast. This one, that's not real world, though. Yeah. Those are just strictly speed tests. It doesn't affect really how you run Final Cut and Motion and Compressor and LumaFusion. It doesn't really reflect the real world application of those.
Right.
So they asked, Lutz says, do you have an overlay in different languages? How much?
You mean like subtitling or?
No. Overlay, keyboard overlay.
On the keyboard overlay.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well,
it's not really. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, it doesn't have any language on it. But
it's just the keys. Yeah.
It's just the keys, and it comes in. Let's see, the UK version and the US version, and then I don't think there's not a one for the Japanese keyboard and a couple other keyboards, but there's the international version and the US version, I think.
Right. So is there anything that you care to talk about as far as an update to LumaFusion in the near future?
Yeah, we're very close to our next release here. We're just, I would say, let's see, what's the date now? I would say measured in days, if not a week or so, maybe.
Wow.
Maybe 2. Yeah. So anyway.
Well, that's exciting.
It is super exciting because the improvements in this next release, well, they're all free for one. There's no purchasing required.
Right.
And it has multi-select on the timeline. And that
Excellent.
can be done in 3 ways. You can lasso a selection. You can select it by caliper in and out range. Or you can actually just add clips by selecting a range. And then you can copy and paste that range of the multi-selected clips into the same timeline or a different timeline. So it's like kind of a game changer for LumaFusion editors. You'll also be able to pick up that multi-selection and drag it to another place on your timeline. So it's taking LumaFusion really right into the area where professional editors commonly work. It's just moving things around, big chunks of work, trying to reorder your timeline. So that is super exciting. And the integration with Frame.io.
Right.
And I think we've done like an amazing job there. So not only can you see your Frame.io footage, you can in LumaFusion, you can make comments on it, add responses to other people's comments on the Frame.io footage. You can put that on your timeline and add comments to your timeline and upload that to Frame.io and get comments back about your timeline. So it really is highly integrated into our library and timeline and in a super way. I love it.
So
we've also integrated that with our FCP XML export so that you can relink back to if it's ProRes or some other footage, relink back to that in Final Cut, to be able to, again, do a proxy editing workflow if you need to on LumaFusion and then right to Final Cut.
Yeah, I forgot about that because Frame.io automatically will create high-res proxies that LumaFusion and any iOS editor can use. So when we see those in our library, they might be ProRes footage. You just edit as normal in LumaFusion, export to Final Cut, and then relink to the ProRes. So it's super cool.
So what's the limit on media for the iPad? Can it use ProRes files at this point? What about ProRes? What's the one? The RAW. What about ProRes RAW?
Yeah, no ProRes format is currently supported on iOS. That's one of the things I'm hoping, by the fact that, FCPX has to do all the work to bring things, to the new Apple Silicon, that we'll see that in the future. They haven't announced anything on that for this year, and I've got some questions in about that, some hopeful questions, but I don't think I'll get any answer on that. But we hope to see that in the future. And so we're certainly working on workflows like Frame.io, where we can still allow you to edit the way you want to edit and work with that original media, get back to that original media when you need to. Now, one thing they did finish up this year that we will take advantage of coming up this fall is they put in the final pieces in iOS to allow us to do a full HDR workflow in LumaFusion. So you'll be able to do, HDR10, HLG, anything you want to work with, PQ, all that. And be able to select that in our projects and really process all the way through at 10-bit without losing any quality. And so all the pieces were very close last year, and I thought we'd be able to do it, but I realized they were missing a couple things, and they finished it up this year and really highlighted that in the session. So that's exciting for us.
10-bit?
Yep, 10-bit. They've supported 10-bit, import and reading, but the last piece was for exporting. They didn't have the last pieces in for that, and now they do. And so really nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes complete sense. So what did, at the WWDC keynote, what didn't Apple say that you'd like to know the answers to? I mean, there's a couple of things that I was wondering. First off, we've been waiting for an update to Final Cut Pro forever, okay? So Final Cut Pro 10.4 is the oldest version of Final Cut in the history of Final Cut Pro 10. It's 30 and 1/2 months old at this point. So the fact that they introduced this new native version of Final Cut, does that mean we're not going to see an update to Final Cut for 3 years for Final Cut 10.4? That's one of the questions I'd like to ask them. I mean... Well, because Logic Pro 10.5 came out 5 weeks ago, right? 10.5, it's not a universal binary 2. As far as we know, it's not. It runs on Intel at this point. That was end of May. So Logic is 10.5. Final Cut Pro has been 10.4 for 30 and a half months at this point. 10.4.8, which was a bug fix, is 6 months old. 10.4.7, which was the Metal 2 inclusion, is 9 months old. So Final Cut is old. It's really old. Now, people say, well, what do you want to see in it? Well, I got a whole list of things I want to see, but that's not the point. That's not the point. The point is, in the development cycle of Final Cut, they've never had 30-plus months, except for 10.0 to 10.1, which was 30 months. This has surpassed that at this point. So the question I have, don't use this as an excuse to not give us an update to Final Cut Pro.
Yeah, so hopefully what they've done is, along with this transition to the Apple Silicon, they've also put in features that'll be a big update for, both platforms. But, the other possibility is that it was so much work getting it across that maybe they won't. So I don't know. I'm guessing we won't get an answer to that until they release it, so we'll see.
Well, that's true. I mean, the thing is, though, that I think releasing a major version of software during the summer is the worst idea. July and August are horrible times to be releasing a major version of a Mac piece of software, because people are on vacation and they're doing this. And, of course, that's not so much nowadays because of the situation we had this spring. But, I mean, don't wait. There's no reason to wait for that version. Well, first off, are you going to run Final Cut on a Mac Mini? That's going to be the first one, right? That's going to be the first one that comes out. Maybe a Mac Mini or a MacBook Air or a MacBook? No. You're going to run it on an iPad? I mean, an iMac, iMac Pro, a Mac Pro, or a MacBook Pro. They are not going to be Apple Silicon ready for years. Maybe 2021. Maybe but more like 2022.
Well, it'll be interesting. There's some rumors that that we may see an iMac by the end of the year, but who knows?
Tim Cook said we not only are we going to support the Intel Macs for years, plural, to come in Mac OS, but also we have And once again, he said plural, Intel Macs in the pipeline that we're really excited about. So I'm presuming those are probably the iMac and the iMac Pro, perhaps, maybe a new MacBook, because it's been 2019. The 16 came out, the 16-inch came out in they had two of them in 2019. They had a 15-inch, which I bought in the summer about a year ago, and then they came out with the 16-inch in 2019. So
yeah, the 16-inch is a nice one. Yeah, so yeah, it'll be interesting. Yeah, I think you're right. That's a really big question about FCP. You know, we don't know their plans, but it'll be interesting to watch.
Well,
hopefully you can get the answer.
They must be working on something, so
well,
we should have to wait and see.
I call Final Cut Pro 10.4 Grandpa Final Cut Pro. It's the oldest version that they ever had. I mean, it's you know, and what am I basing that on? I'm basing it on precedent. What Apple's done for the last 9 years. We had the 9th birthday of Final Cut Pro, June 21st, and day before WWDC. So I'm basing it on precedent from Apple and the Final Cut Pro team. Yeah. So I'd still expect a version of. There's no reason to wait. I mean, they don't have to wait for a perfect version of the Apple Silicon version because you're not going to have a machine that's going to run it very effectively. So give us the version that you have, just like you did. Look, Logic is bypassing Final Cut Pro by far. Okay, Logic not only had 10.5 come out, right? It had 10.5.1 already come out, and Final Cut's still at 10.4.8. Just so come on. So do you ever, Terry? Do you ever use Final Cut these days, or are you just strictly with LumaFusion? Do you ever check it out just to check it out, Final Cut?
I check it out, but I use I use LumaFusion for everything we edit.
Right.
And I do that on purpose because I want to know if there's something I can't do. What's the point where I have to move to a desktop editor? And so far it's not very often that I have to do that. So
right. Do you just check it out every once in a while to see what the latest?
Oh yeah, we export to Final Cut, so there's a need for us to make sure things are working all the time, and just see, like for instance, our transitions. It would be nice if our transitions could be mapped to appropriate transitions on their timeline in all cases, or things like that. So,
and and we look at it. Obviously, they've done a lot of nice things in there. So when we're looking at a feature, we of course look at it to see how they've implemented it. Little joke around here of what would Final Cut do. We don't always do what they do, and we often do something else because we feel we can be more flexible. But still, that team has done a great job in a lot of what they've done. So there's no reason not to look at the way they've done it.
No, absolutely. Yeah. The team's fantastic. I really missed seeing them and everybody at NAB this year, and then probably. Going forward, everything's going to be virtual for a while anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah, what they're going to do with the summit? I guess that won't happen this year, huh?
Probably not the FCP Creator Summit. Yeah.
I would. Yeah. I mean, do you want to get on an airplane right now?
No,
that's the problem. Is this in that the worst case scenario is flying on an airplane in an enclosed cabin with people in those crowded seats and breathing the same air for 5 or 6 hours, even if you have a mask. It's just like, that's the worst. I mean, it's.
Well, I was reading an article that said, if you think that's bad, the airport is even worse. So just, stay out of the airport. And I'm like, well, okay, not going anywhere.
Yeah, it was great seeing you at the Creative Summit last year. I mean, I see you at NAB for the last 2 years, but the Creative Summit was really nice. I like the Creative Summit so much when we meet in person because you get to see everybody, you get to talk with everybody, and you have coffee in the morning with people, and you have just concentrated Final Cut Pro discussions for like 3 or 4 days, and everybody's in the same hotel area. And last year we even got who's that guy, that Avid editor? We got to buy a version of LumaFusion at the Creative Summit.
I can't remember who that was, but yeah, it was a lot of fun.
It was Mike. Yeah. Mike, Mike. I forget what his last name is, but yeah, we got him We got him to buy.
That was funny.
Yeah, I kept pressuring him. I said, just buy it. Whatever.
$30.
$30 at that point.
Well, that's the other thing is like people are like, oh no, what if Final Cut comes to iPad? Oh, big scary thing for you guys. And I'm like, well, no, because it's $30. What editor doesn't have the ability to have two editing softwares on iPad?
Absolutely.
Like you don't have to choose one or the other. You can kind of, okay, this is best for this moment in my editing, and this is best for the other. And
yes.
I think that's expected. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear that all the time. What about how would it affect LumaFusion? I said, I don't think it's going to affect them. I said, I like LumaFusion already. I mean, I'm not going to not use LumaFusion. First off, I'm not going to use Final Cut on the iPad. I'm just not. I don't have any reason to. I use it on. I have a Mac Pro sitting right over here. Why am I going to use Final Cut on an iPad? There's no use case for me. Now I understand.
That might be why they don't do it, because of you.
Well, the first time I met Steve Bays when he was on the Final Cut Pro team, it was 2016 because they got the 2016 MacBook Pros out with the Touch Bar that year. And he didn't know me, and I didn't know him. And they're in the Apple headquarters demoing Final Cut on the MacBook Pro with, at that point, it was monitors, but it wasn't Apple monitors. It was LG monitors or something. And he was sitting at the desk, and people would wander in, and he'd show them some things. And I walked in there, and I said, "Hi, my name's Richard Taylor." And he looked at me and goes, "Your reputation precedes you." That's what I said. I said, "I guess it does." Well, I've had that master list, 100 things I want to see in Final Cut Pro for years. I actually started it with Final Cut Pro version 5, not even 10. I started it with version 5, things like this. Even a scrolling timeline, number one. You guys have a scrolling timeline. It's another thing that you have that Final Cut doesn't have. Now, you said, Terry, at one point that you have to have a scrolling timeline on the iPad because otherwise you can't access. I mean, now
your fingers can't go off the edge of the screen, so you can't.
Right, but Final Cut, but the Final Cut Pro playhead scrolls off the screen.
Yeah.
Right.
Right
which
now.
would be a problem for iPad.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's the aggravation about the scrolling timeline is the playhead scrolls off the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And where is it? You don't even.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous that it doesn't stay centered or at least page. Like you can have a paging option.
Yeah. I mean, most of them do page at least.
Everyone.
Well, I suppose,
Everyone.
Yeah.
iMovie on the iPad, Logic Pro. You can have 2 scrolling timelines in Logic Pro. Motion has a scrolling timeline.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you don't want to use a scrolling timeline, the idea that the playhead scrolls off the screen and out of view is ridiculous to me. That's absolutely ridiculous. It does. It scrolls off the screen.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, maybe there's some benefit to not being redirected to a point in your timeline. You could, play something and then keep working where you were when the timeline jumped back. But I think you're right. I know that's one of your pet peeves.
Well, the other thing is you can turn it off. If you don't want it, you turn it off.
Right. Yeah, you should have it as an option.
Exactly. Yeah. No, people say, I don't want that. Well, then don't use it. Don't turn the option on. I mean, Logic Pro has an advanced set of preferences. You can turn things. It has a master button that turns them all on, or you can select up to 6 different advanced options in the preferences. So Final Cut should have the same kind of thing. Yeah. One of the other things about Final Cut that we've been talking about recently is you can't save settings as default. For example, your column layout in the browser. You make a custom column layout, you can't save it as the default one. When you choose the spatial conform, whether it fills the screen or it stays the same, you can't save that as a preference.
Oh.
Wow.
And it seems like that would be a no-brainer. Just a little checkbox, save this as the preference. And the things that really drive me crazy is the motion keyframing in the viewer. If you've ever done a move in Final Cut by moving a clip across, it does this weird S keyframing move, and I have reset that to linear thousands of times over the last 9 years because I hate that move. And every time I have to go back and set it to linear. Why can't I save that as the default keyframing?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So these are the kind of things that I have on my list.
I'm glad you mentioned that. So we're hoping to working in over the next year on, things like advanced keyframing for LumaFusion. So that we'll can
make sure we have a preset default. Yeah.
Well, just
at least for size and position, know, I mean, for speed, you might want a different setting than for size and position, but I see what you're saying there.
Well, it just makes common sense when you set up your browser layout. This is what I want. Why can't that be the default layout? Right. When you have spatial conform, when you do stereo or dual mono audio, and you want it all those, why can't you just choose? Click this to make it the default.
I mean, I think that's one thing that is nice about developing for the iPad is we have to go for what's the most desired outcome, and that will be the default because we don't have a lot of settings for every little thing. So we have to say, okay, the user said it that way. That's probably the way they want it. We should leave it that way. And that's generally what we do. So things are generally persistent in LumaFusion. And I think that does make it a lot nicer to use.
But having said that, I love the Final Cut Pro team. They are some of the best people in the world. I really, really like those guys and gals. And they're just fantastic, and they do a great job.
Yeah, we've met them, and we also really like them, and we've had some dinners with them and really have fun talking. And, there's just a long history of video like you have and like Chris and I have, and it just makes for a very natural conversation and friendship.
Yep. Is there anything we haven't touched on you guys want to talk about? You have a new version of LumaFusion coming out days or a week or so, which is very exciting. Yep. Very exciting. Yep. So I remember you, Terry, you talking about how complex copy and paste was at one point. It's not that simple because you don't know where you're pasting to.
Well, again, like we had to really examine everything that you can do when you're copying and pasting, whether you're copying a clip with attributes or you're just copying the attributes, when you're pasting to multiple things, pasting to one thing, and also different places on the timeline, and figure out what is the most likely intention here. And that just took a lot of work, more than anyone would expect, just to say, okay, think it through. What is someone trying to do here, and how can we make that evident what's happening? So we went through a lot of, I'm not going to say churn, but redesigns.
Sure.
And some improvements along the way. And that's what we're still finishing up a couple of those because it's like we want it, to be as close to perfect as we can day one. And, we don't have, one of the things we don't have the, in Final Cut, they just keep adding new tracks, because they have no limit on that. And, we couldn't do that in here. So we had to make some decisions on, okay, what happens if we run out of tracks and you want to paste a bunch of clips? What do we do? What's the right thing to do at that point? Now everything's always undoable, but we always want to let the user know, make them feel like they know what it should do. And it does something, they go, okay, that makes sense what it just did.
Right.
And then they can count on that every time. And that's where we've put our focus into to make sure that always works right.
Yeah. Insert and overwrite mode, as you know, on the timeline.
Right.
So we had to do this all, make sure all of that works. And I think it really does it. And even our beta testers at the last hour came up with, I'd really like to say whether I want to replace effects or add to the list of effects. And so we were able to integrate that suggestion from one of our beta testers right away. And so, it's there, I think.
So, Chris, you mentioned before about audio units. Are they back yet, or are you still having issues with those?
They're still not back yet, but I will say that, we brought on an engineer who is an incredible audio engineer. He's a senior engineer in the industry, has worked on a lot of products on Mac, in fact. And so he is going to be, that's his next big focus, is going to be really working through our pipeline, improving all the user interfaces of our existing, effects, and bringing back the, audio units, third-party audio units as well. So we'll hopefully, I don't know exactly the time frame, but it's a big focus coming up right after this update. So hopefully we'll see it soon.
We're hoping to have all the right UIs for the
Right.
the EQs and all that. So that's going to be cool.
I just don't know how you do all that stuff on an iPad. It's just, I mean, audio units, on a regular Mac are just, sometimes they're pretty intensive. So.
Yeah. It's, it's, again, we're lucky that we're on Apple's platforms because, they've done a lot of the heavy lifting for us. And then we just have to make sure we don't mess that up and we do things right on our side. That was one of the things with copy and paste. Suddenly people are selecting thousands of clips on the timeline. We had to spend a lot of time getting performance, improved so that feels right too. So that was a lot of the time. So yeah, it's amazing the things when you start doing a feature, you go, oh, this will be easy, cut a few clips, paste them, and no problem. But then suddenly the first person who gets it goes, oh, I'm going to take 1,000 clips and copy and paste them from one project to another. Then we have to go, oh yeah, that took a little longer than we hoped. So we got to work on it.
No, I realize that when I make requests that it sounds simple to me, like saving a default preference, I realize it could open up a whole can of worms as far as the way that, the app works or whatever. I realize that. I mean, when I make suggestions, and other people make suggestions too. I mean, we all like the Final Cut Pro team for the most part. I mean, I do for sure. I'm very, very appreciative of what they've done over the years.
Oh my gosh! I mean, it's pretty amazing how they've managed the whole roles, and it's to see a fully developed timeline for a feature film on Final Cut is just astounding. The amount of stuff going on, and
Absolutely.
I'm amazed by that team.
Absolutely. So I don't even know, the iPad Pro, how big of a display can it run right now? It can run one display on USB-C or external?
Yeah, it can run one display on USB-C, at 4K, and I haven't tried anything beyond 4K.
That's incredible. More, but I mean, that's incredible to me.
Yeah, it's impressive. Yeah, what it can do.
So that's really good. So I have a 34-inch monitor here. I got an LG monitor with my Mac Pro, and then I have a vertical monitor over to the side where I keep palettes and things. And my screens are always filled up with stuff. I'm always, it's just the way it is. Is there anything we didn't cover?
Not that I can think of. I mean,
no, not offhand.
We missed NAB this year, and so
I really missed that. Yeah.
We did miss it, but it actually allowed us to really put our heads down and get into, just continue work as normal. So I usually schedule things so that there's a big break for NAB, and then all this preparation for NAB, and we just didn't have to do that. So we were able to just spend it on developing, which was nice.
The one good thing about not going to NAB is I saved that money for my iPhone 12.
There you go.
Because
that's right.
Probably about the same amount of money. I got the 11 Pro Max. It wasn't cheap. $1,400 I got the 512 gigabyte version.
Wow.
With Apple Care and all that stuff. Plus, look, I was going to buy it because they had such a great improvement in the video camera. That's all I really care about with the phones. What have they improved in the video recording? So they have the 4, this kills me too. They have 4 4K cameras in the iPhone 11 Pro Max. 4. One front facing and then 3 back facing. Independent 4K cameras. But on their 2016 MacBook Pro, they have a 720p camera.
Yeah, that's still sort of funny.
That's very peculiar to me. That they didn't at least update it to 1080p. The only 1080p camera they have is on the iMac Pro. That has a 1080p.
Okay.
How much can they record simultaneously on those 4K cameras?
With Filmic Pro's app, you can record 2 cameras simultaneously. And you can either do picture-in-picture or 2 separate files.
Oh, 4K.
No, 1080p. That's an Apple restriction.
1080p when you're,
Apple restriction.
Yeah, probably if they were going to increase that too.
Well, I use that. It's called, what is it called? I forget what it's called. Filmic Pro does the app. Double take, yes. And I love it. Yeah. I started using it, and I absolutely use it all the time now. If I'm doing like a walking interview and I'm talking about something and I'm talking to somebody, and then they can have both of us on. and I do the separate file so I can turn mine on and off depending on whatever.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I heard Filmic, I don't know if it was when you were on with them or not, Terry, last time, that they can't put that in Filmic Pro because of something complicated. But I love the app. I love Double Take.
Good. Yeah, they've done a good job with it. Filmic always does a good job with their apps, and so they always take it a step beyond what everybody else does, just like we do. So it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And you guys are in the same building, right? You were at one point?
Oh, pre-COVID, the Seattle office, which is design, marketing, customer support, and all sorts of stuff like that. QA is in Seattle, and that is co-shared with an office with Filmic. So in the same room. So, it's fun. Same big room, open plan, sort of.
So, what's your prediction on NAB next year? Are we going to have, because the reason is because Las Vegas, they make their money by in-person, and there's a lot of pressure there to do that again. Now, I'm not saying that they will, but that's almost a year from now. Do you think we'll have the live NAB again?
Well, I can say that from the mails I've gotten from them, ask us if we would want to move our funds into next year's NAB. And I said, well, if it's in April, we're not going to be going because, I don't feel it would be safe for our team to go by then. And they said, well, it may not be April.
Oh,
so
okay.
I was like, okay, well, we'll think about that. But I think they're still planning on it. But, the world is not, we're at the mercy of something that we can't control. So
Vegas, Vegas
might try.
Vegas is going bankrupt without people in person. I mean, the casinos opened up and stuff. So I'm not saying that, it just at some point, I guess things will get back to more normal situation, hopefully.
I would hope that, it's science. It's not marketing, or it's not, it's not the economy for once. It can't be, unfortunately. If it was just the economy, we'd all just go back to work, right?
Right.
But there's a bit of science involved that means they want to open, but that may not be the way it works.
No, that's true. That's true. But I
we'll have a vaccine.
I do miss, I like the virtual events, but I really miss the in-person stuff.
Oh, me too.
We do too.
Yeah.
We do too.
The funny part was I've been to NAB 3 times, I think, and this would have been the 4th time. I was always hyper vigilant about washing my hands all the time, because I'd be out there on the floor shaking people's hands, and I'd get to the men's room and I'd sit there and wash my hands all the time before all this stuff started.
Yeah.
Because I've heard about the NAB crud that they used to have. People would catch something from whatever NAB flu afterwards. So, all right.
Sure.
If there's anything else, we'll go ahead and sign off for the day.
We'll have some more announcements coming in a little while, and I'd like you to definitely be the first to know. So just keep in touch.
Well, you let me know. I will absolutely be the first to announce it, whatever you've got. Absolutely. Fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. All right.
I really appreciate you having us on. Thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure. You'll be on again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Bye. Thanks, Chris and Terry, for stopping by.